Poor African janitor answers a call in Arabic in front of a billionaire executive. Then this happened. She was invisible to everyone in that towering glass building. Just a poor African woman pushing a mop in silence, blending into the marble floors she polished every night. But one afternoon, as she quietly cleaned outside the executive boardroom, her phone rang. And what she did next shocked every soul in that room. She answered, in perfect Arabic. The room went silent. The billionaire CEO, Zaid Al-Fulan, looked up, stunned. His past, and hers, were about to collide in a way no one could have predicted. What followed was a story of identity, legacy, and a revelation that would change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. This helps us bring more inspiring stories like this to you. Zaid Al-Fulan sat behind the grand mahogany table, his tailored navy suit immaculate, a platinum watch glinting under the recessed lights. His presence dominated the room, the kind that made even seasoned executives sit straighter and choose their words carefully. Discussions of a multi-billion-dollar merger were in full swing when an unfamiliar sound broke the rhythm, a soft ringtone, echoing faintly through the open glass doors of the boardroom. It was subtle, but distinct in the heavy corporate silence. Every head turned toward the source. Just beyond the threshold, near the polished marble corridor, a woman fumbled with a battered old phone. Her dark hands trembled slightly as she pressed it to her ear. Then, the moment that no one could have anticipated, she spoke. Fluent, graceful Arabic flowed effortlessly from her lips, her tone soft yet commanding. Zaid's heart seemed to skip a beat. That dialect. It wasn't just Arabic. It was the rare Gulf dialect spoken in the heartlands of his ancestors. A dialect almost lost to time, spoken only in the hidden villages his family once called home. Who was she? The woman's name tag read Amara, just a janitor in the building, invisible until this very moment. But there was nothing invisible about her now. Her back straightened as she carried on the brief conversation, her voice filled with warmth and authority. And though she tried to keep the call discreet, the words echoed through the marble-clad hallway like an ancient song returning to life. Zaid stood abruptly, his leather chair groaning under the sudden movement. The room fell silent. His senior advisors glanced at each other in confusion, but Zaid's eyes were locked on Amara. For a fleeting moment, she froze under his gaze, a hint of recognition passing through her dark, expressive eyes, before she quickly ended the call and tucked the phone away. With measured steps, Zaid approached her. His polished Italian shoes clicked against the marble, the sound sharp and deliberate. "Where did you learn that dialect?" he asked, his voice low but intense. Amara swallowed hard, her hands clasped tightly in front of her stained cleaning uniform. She hesitated, as if debating whether to reveal a truth long buried. "It was my mother's tongue," she finally answered, her accent flawless. She taught me before she passed. Zaid's chest tightened. His mind raced. That dialect was spoken in Al-Muraya, a forgotten coastal village known only to a handful of old families, his family included. Your mother, what was her name? He asked, his voice cracking ever so slightly. Amara lowered her eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. Layla bint Farik. The name hit Zaid like a tidal wave. His mother had once spoken of a childhood friend, Layla, the one who had mysteriously disappeared after the coastal lands were devastated by political turmoil decades ago. Rumors said Layla's family had fled, never to be heard from again. And here, standing before him, was the living proof that those stories had a continuation. For a long, heavy moment, neither of them spoke. Around them, the busy corporate world continued. Footsteps, conversations, business deals. But for Zaid and Amara, time seemed to have stopped. Without thinking, Zaid did something no one in that building had ever witnessed. He reached out and gently took her hands in his. You're not invisible anymore, he said softly, his powerful voice trembling. You're part of a story that deserves to be told. And just like that, in the most unexpected of moments, a billionaire executive and a poor janitor found their lives irreversibly entwined by a forgotten past and the undeniable pull of shared heritage. Amara didn't know what to say. For years, she had buried her heritage beneath the harsh realities of survival. Scrubbing marble floors and emptying trash bins had become her existence. But now, standing before the most powerful man in the building, perhaps the entire city, she felt exposed, as if the very foundation she had built to protect herself was crumbling. Zaid felt the weight of the moment too. His world was built on control, power, and calculated decisions. But this encounter wasn't something he could negotiate or predict. It was raw, deeply personal, and it stirred something in him he hadn't felt in years, a connection to a past he had long neglected. Amara, he said, his voice softer now, almost reverent. I want you to come with me. Her eyes widened. Go. Where? To my office, he clarified. Please. There are things I need to understand. The hallway had gone quiet. Several executives watched from the boardroom with barely concealed curiosity. Amara glanced around nervously, feeling the invisible walls of class and status closing in. But Zaid offered a small, reassuring nod, and somehow that was enough to make her legs move. She followed him through the glass corridors, past doors she had only ever cleaned but never entered. For the first time, she crossed into the executive floor as a guest, not as a janitor. Inside his sprawling office, sunlight poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating walls lined with priceless art and shelves filled with rare books. It was a world far removed from the tiny studio apartment where she slept on a worn mattress. Zaid gestured for her to sit on the plush leather chair across from his imposing desk. But he didn't sit. Instead, he stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the city skyline. "Tell me everything," he said quietly, without turning around. "About your mother. About how you ended up here." Amara took a slow, shaky breath. No one had asked her for her story in years, and now, suddenly, her voice felt small in this grand space. "My mother, Layla, grew up by the sea," she began, her fingers nervously twisting the fabric of her uniform. "She used to tell me stories of a place called Al-Muraya, a beautiful village with turquoise waters and white sands. But the stories always ended with sadness. One night, when I was still very young, she took me and fled. She never told me why, only that it wasn't safe to stay." Zaid's jaw tightened. He knew exactly what had happened. Political upheaval had torn through that region, forcing families like his to choose between loyalty and survival. Layla had been caught in the crossfire of decisions made by powerful men like his own father. "Where did you go?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "We wandered for years, across borders, through refugee camps. Eventually we ended up here." She paused, her throat tightening. "My mother fell ill not long after. I've been alone ever since." Zaid finally turned around, his eyes filled with emotions he hadn't let surface in years. Guilt, sorrow, and something deeper, a sense of responsibility. "You've been living like this all these years? Cleaning offices for men like me?" His voice cracked with disbelief. Amara looked down, embarrassed. "It's honest work," she whispered. "Better than the streets." Zaid walked toward her, his footsteps heavy with regret. "You deserve more than this, Amara. You deserve a life worthy of your mother's memory." "But I'm just a janitor," she protested gently. "No," Zaid said firmly, kneeling before her so their eyes met at the same level. "You are a survivor. You carry a legacy that even I have forgotten. And I promise you, from this day on, you'll never walk through these halls unseen again." For the first time in years, Amara felt something stir deep within her. A fragile but undeniable sense of hope. And in that moment, neither money nor power defined their connection. It was something far greater, a shared past, and a future about to be rewritten. The following morning, Amara arrived at the building as she always did, before sunrise, before the city had fully awakened. But this time, everything felt different. As she stepped through the grand revolving doors, her old cart wasn't waiting for her. Instead, a tall, impeccably dressed man greeted her near the reception desk. "Miss Amara?" he asked, offering a respectful nod. "Mr. Al-Fulan has requested your presence. Follow me, please." Confusion swept over her like a cold breeze. She glanced around the lobby, unsure if this was some kind of mistake. But the man was already leading the way toward the executive elevators, the ones she'd never even been allowed to clean, let alone enter. Inside the elevator, a silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft hum of classical music. Amara's heart pounded in her chest. What could Zaid possibly want from her now? Had she overstepped by telling him her story? The doors opened directly onto the top floor. The luxurious space was like something from a dream: white marble floors, golden accents, and a panoramic view of the city stretching beyond the skyline. But what stunned Amara even more was the sight waiting for her. Zaid al-Fulan stood near a long glass conference table, and beside him, a document folder and a small velvet box. "Amara," he greeted her warmly, his demeanor completely changed from the authoritative billionaire she'd witnessed the day before. "Please, come in. Sit." She moved cautiously, her mind racing through every possible reason for this summons. But nothing could have prepared her for what Zaid was about to say. "I couldn't sleep last night," he admitted, his eyes locked on hers. "I kept thinking about what you told me, about your mother, about her sacrifices, and about you, the life you've been forced to live." Amara lowered her gaze, feeling the weight of the shame she'd carried for years. "You shouldn't be ashamed," Zaid added quickly, reading her thoughts. "If anything, I am the one who carries the burden. My family's legacy, the wealth and comfort I've known, it all came at the cost of people like your mother being forgotten." He took a deep breath, his fingers resting on the velvet box. "I want to change that," he continued, "starting with you." Amara frowned slightly. "I don't understand." Zaid opened the box, revealing a beautiful, delicately crafted pendant. It was a traditional design from Al-Muraya, one Amara recognized instantly. Her mother used to sketch it for her on scraps of paper when she told stories of their lost homeland. "This belonged to my grandmother," Zaid explained. "It was passed down through generations, and now I believe it's meant to return to the family it was once stolen from." Tears welled up in Amara's eyes as she reached out, her fingers trembling. She couldn't believe what she was seeing, what she was holding. It was as if her mother had reached out from beyond the grave to remind her that she belonged to something greater. "And this," Zaid gestured to the folder, "is a formal offer. A scholarship, fully funded, to any university of your choosing. I've also arranged for new living accommodations, somewhere safe, comfortable. You won't spend another night in that run-down apartment." Amara gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "Mr. Al-Fulan, I can't accept this." "You will accept it," he said gently but firmly. "Because this isn't charity, Amara. It's justice. It's a debt long overdue, and I intend to repay it, not just for you, but for every person like you that my family's success left behind." For a long moment, Amara couldn't breathe. The years of hardship, the nights she went to bed hungry, the moments she'd almost given up hope, All of it flooded her heart in a tidal wave of emotion. And just like that, her life, once confined to mopping floors in silent despair, opened to a world of unimaginable possibilities. Through her tears, she looked at Zaid and found the words she never thought she'd say. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when no one else did." And with that, the first chapter of her new life began. The news of Amara's sudden rise spread through the building like wildfire. Whispers trailed her steps wherever she went, though she now walked those marble corridors with a quiet grace rather than hurried submission. In the space of a single day, she had gone from an invisible janitor to the woman everyone wanted to know, to understand, perhaps even to envy. But with visibility came discomfort. Amara wasn't used to the sharp eyes following her every move, nor the subtle judgments hidden behind polite smiles. It was easier when no one noticed her. Now, her every step felt like a performance she hadn't rehearsed for. Zaid was well aware of this. He had seen it before. How sudden change could weigh heavier than poverty itself. That afternoon, as the golden sun dipped toward the horizon, casting the city skyline in a soft, amber glow, Zaid asked his driver to bring the car around. He called Amara personally. "Meet me downstairs," he said. "I want to show you something." Confused but unable to refuse, Amara made her way outside. The luxury black sedan idled at the curb, and for the first time in her life, someone opened the door for her. She slipped inside, her heart pounding in her chest. Zaid sat across from her, his posture relaxed, but his eyes intense. "Tell me, Amara," he began, as the car pulled smoothly into traffic. "What did you dream about before all this hardship took it away from you?" Amara hesitated. The question felt foreign, almost cruel in its simplicity. She hadn't allowed herself to dream in years. What good did it do to dream when reality demanded survival? I'm not sure I remember," she admitted softly, her gaze fixed on the city lights passing by. Zaid smiled gently. "Then it's time to remember." The car took them further from the bustling business district and into the quieter, historic parts of the city. After nearly 30 minutes, it stopped outside a beautiful stone building, adorned with intricate arches and delicate ironwork balconies. "This place," Amara whispered, her eyes wide. "It looks like something from Al-Muraya." Zaid nodded. "It was designed by an architect from that region, one of the last buildings in the city to capture our ancestral style before modern skyscrapers took over." He stepped out and held the door for her. Together they entered the building and climbed a grand staircase that opened onto a wide, sun-drenched terrace overlooking the ocean. The air smelled faintly of salt and jasmine, and the soft sound of waves crashing against the shore reached their ears. Zaid stood silently for a moment, letting her take it all in. "This is where my mother used to bring me when life felt too heavy," he confessed quietly. A reminder that no matter how tall the walls of the city grew, we were born of the sea, of freedom, and of resilience. Amara turned to him, emotion tightening her chest. She had spent so long looking down, at floors to scrub, at obstacles to avoid, that she'd forgotten how to look up, how to breathe freely. "I brought you here," Zaid continued, his voice low and deliberate, "to remind you that no matter how far life has pushed you down, you come from a lineage of people who rise." Amara swallowed hard. Her fingers brushed over the pendant still hanging from her neck, a symbol of a past she was only beginning to reclaim. For the first time in as long as she could remember, she allowed herself to imagine. What would it be like to study at a university? To build a life not defined by survival, but by purpose? "Do you believe I can do it?" she asked, her voice barely above the sound of the wind. Zaid turned to her then, his gaze unwavering. "I believe you were meant to," he said, "and I will walk beside you every step of the way." In that quiet moment on the terrace, with the sun setting over the water and the weight of the past slowly lifting from her shoulders, Amara felt something she thought was lost forever: hope. The weeks that followed were nothing short of extraordinary. Amara had stepped into a life she never imagined possible. Mornings no longer began with the weight of a mop in her hands, but with carefully selected textbooks and the quiet hum of a new laptop, her first. She attended preparatory courses, surrounded by students much younger than her, and though she felt out of place at first, she quickly proved herself capable. But with every step forward, a quiet storm brewed beneath the surface. Zaid, despite his promises and generosity, found himself struggling with his own turmoil. He had opened a door for Amara, but in doing so, he unlocked a part of himself he had kept tightly sealed, his own connection to Al-Muraya and the legacy his family had long ignored. One rainy evening, as lightning painted streaks across the darkened sky, Zaid sat alone in his penthouse, a heavy glass of aged whiskey untouched on the table before him. The room was silent, except for the sound of the rain against the massive windows. In his hands, he held a faded photograph, one he hadn't looked at in years. It was his mother, smiling on the shores of Al-Muraya, standing next to a young girl with dark, curious eyes. Layla, Amara's mother. He wondered how different their lives could have been had the decisions of powerful men not torn their families apart. A deep, gnawing guilt settled in his chest. His family's wealth had been built, at least in part, on the displacement of people like Layla and Amara. And now, no matter how much he gave Amara, would it ever truly be enough to right those wrongs? Just as he drowned in the weight of those thoughts, his phone vibrated against the table. A message from Amara appeared. "I passed my first entrance exam." a simple sentence, yet it carried the weight of a lifetime of struggle and triumph. For a moment, Zaid closed his eyes. That message felt like a light piercing through his darkest thoughts. He typed back quickly despite his trembling hands. "I'm proud of you. You've only just begun." But even as he sent it, he knew the storm wasn't over. There were whispers within his own business circles. Senior executives had started questioning his decisions, particularly his personal involvement with Amara. At a board meeting earlier that week, a senior advisor had pulled him aside. "Be careful, Zaid," the man warned in a hushed tone. "You're treading dangerous ground, merging personal history with business affairs. It's not wise." Zaid had dismissed him at the time, but the words lingered. And tonight, under the heavy weight of the storm, those doubts resurfaced. Was he helping Amara out of compassion, or out of a deep, unspoken need to redeem his own soul? Meanwhile, across the city, Amara sat on the small balcony of her new apartment, a modest but beautiful space overlooking a quiet park. Her textbooks were spread out before her, but her eyes weren't on the pages. They were lost in the horizon, watching the storm roll across the sky. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the thunder. She saw in it a reflection of her own journey, chaotic, unpredictable, but powerful. Yet, a different kind of storm was growing within her. She had started hearing the rumors. Some people whispered that she was nothing more than a charity case, a symbol of Zaid's guilt, rather than a woman earning her place in the world. Others speculated that something romantic was blooming between them, and that was why she was receiving his support. Those words cut deeper than she expected. She didn't want to be anyone's charity, and she certainly didn't want people to believe she'd been given everything because of a man's affection. She wanted to earn this life, on her own terms. The next morning, before the sun had even risen, Amara made a decision. She dressed in her simple clothes and walked back to the building where it all began. She found Zaid in his office, as always, before the rest of the city had even woken up. He looked up in surprise as she entered, her eyes burning with a quiet determination. "I need to speak with you," she said firmly. He nodded, sensing the gravity of her tone. "I'm grateful for everything you've done," she began, her voice steady despite the tremble in her hands. "But I have to do this on my own now. No more gifts, no more special arrangements. If I'm going to have a new life, it has to be a life I've built myself." Zaid stood slowly, crossing the room until he was standing just before her. His eyes searched hers for a long moment before he finally nodded. "If that's what you need, Amara," he said quietly, "then that's what you'll have. But remember, you're not alone, and you never will be again." Amara took a deep breath, the weight of that promise settling in her heart. For the first time, she wasn't stepping away from something. She was stepping toward the life she had chosen. The following months tested Amara in ways she had never experienced before. Without Zaid's financial support cushioning her journey, every step forward felt like walking against a relentless wind. But that was exactly how she wanted it. She found part-time work tutoring younger students in languages, a skill that had once seemed useless but now became her most valuable asset. Arabic, French, and even fragments of forgotten coastal dialects poured from her lips as easily as breathing. She studied during every free moment, her tiny apartment often lit only by the faint glow of her laptop screen through the long, sleepless nights. Her muscles ached from the long days, and exhaustion crept into her bones. But Amara refused to let her body give up before her heart did. And yet, despite the distance she tried to place between herself and Zaid, he remained a quiet, watchful presence. True to his word, he honored her wishes. There were no more extravagant gifts, no more unexpected offers. But every now and then, she'd find a small, silent reminder of his support. A single jasmine flower left anonymously outside her door. A rare book on the culture of Al-Moraya, placed quietly on the library desk where she often studied. Little things, subtle things, not acts of charity, but acts of remembrance. One evening, as a winter storm rolled across the city, Amara found herself at the gates of the university she dreamed of attending. She stood there for a long time, the wind biting at her cheeks, her hands buried deep in the thin pockets of her coat. Tomorrow was the entrance interview, the final hurdle. She felt the familiar doubt creeping in. Was she truly enough? Or was she simply a symbol of someone else's redemption story, destined to be remembered as the poor janitor who almost made it? Then, behind her, a familiar voice cut through the sound of the storm. "You're already standing here," Zaid said quietly. "That's more than most people ever dare." Amara turned to find him standing a few paces behind, his overcoat billowing slightly in the wind, his face somber but warm. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, her breath visible in the cold air. "And yet, here I am." His eyes didn't waver. "Not to rescue you, not to intervene, just to remind you of who you really are." Amara swallowed the lump forming in her throat. "I'm afraid," she admitted, her voice barely audible above the wind. "What if they see me the way everyone else always has? Just a girl who cleans floors?" Zaid took a step closer, his eyes holding hers with quiet intensity. "Then you remind them," he said, his voice steady, "that you're the girl who used to clean floors. And now you're the woman who refuses to let that define her." In that moment, Amara felt something break free inside her, a weight she didn't even realize she'd been carrying, the weight of other people's perceptions, the fear of being trapped by her own past. She stood taller, squared her shoulders, and looked back at the university gates. The next morning, she walked into the interview room with her head held high. The panel of professors stared at her, their expressions unreadable, as they reviewed her file. Her academic record wasn't perfect. Years of struggle had left gaps. But her language skills were unmatched. Her understanding of cultural heritage, of resilience, of lived experience, those were lessons no textbook could offer. And when they asked the inevitable question, "Why should we choose you over countless other applicants?" Amara spoke not just with her voice, but with her heart. "Because while others have learned about history in classrooms," she said calmly, "I have lived it. And now I am ready to write a future that honors every chapter of my past." There was silence, and then a single nod from the head professor. 3 days later, a letter arrived. Amara had been accepted. She stood on her small balcony again, clutching the letter to her chest as tears streamed down her face. She had done it, on her own terms. And across the city, Zaid sat at his office window, watching the storm clouds part. He knew she wouldn't call. She wouldn't need to. Her success was the only message he ever wanted to receive. And in the quiet of that evening, both of them, separated by distance but forever connected by a shared legacy, found peace. Months turned into a year. Amara not only excelled at the university, but became a speaker for cultural resilience programs, inspiring countless others with her story. She walked across the graduation stage with her head held high, wearing a gown that felt heavier with pride than with fabric. In the front row of the audience, Zaid sat quietly, no longer the imposing billionaire, but a man humbled by witnessing true courage. Their eyes met as she held her diploma high, and in that brief exchange, no words were needed. Later that evening, a small celebration was held on the very terrace where it had all begun. Amara stood by the railing, watching the sun set over the ocean, the breeze carrying the scent of jasmine. Zaid approached, holding a small velvet box. "This time," he said softly, "it's not a gift. It's a reminder of everything you've earned." Inside was a delicate bracelet, engraved with a single word in Arabic: Fakhar, pride. Amara smiled, tears welling up, but she didn't cry. Not this time, because for the first time in her life, she felt it, real, unshakable pride.